Welcome to the Time Machine Virtual Tour. This tour will take us on a virtual walk through the lovely city of Yorkton. However, there is a special feature of this tour. As the name implies, this tour has a time machine, which will take us back to what various locations, businesses, and buildings looked like in the past. At a few times in this tour, current buildings will seem to disappear as we look at older buildings that have since been demolished. There are going to be some sad parts to this as a result, so ready your heart as well as your mind. That being said, start your DeLorean, twist your time turner, and hold on to your TARDIS. We're about to go back in time. The first place we're going to visit is one you have probably seen many times as you drive through Yorkton, the Parkland Mall. As we focus on the eastern end of the mall, we see that it is dominated by the Yorkton Canadian Tire and its distinctive outside design. However, as we set our time machine back to the year 2005 and pull its lever, we can see that Canadian Tire was not the original tenant of this spot. As the colors settle, we see that the once defunct but recently revived Canadian chain Zellers once occupied this spot. Zellers was a branch of the Hudson's Bay Company and acted as its discount store that competed with chains like Walmart. Today, it's more like a brand in the HBC, less than a branch. As we look around the parking lot, we see that it's not very occupied. This is because, as Walmart became bigger and other stores like Real Canadian Superstore began tapping into areas like furniture and homeware, Zellers lost its footing and, not long after this photo was taken, disappeared altogether. If we look closely at this view, we see in the distance that a Sobeys is occupying Save On Foods' current spot. This mall clearly has seen many changes over the years, with many stores coming and going as trends and popularity go. So let's reverse the time machine, return to the present, and move on. Our next stop is another prominent store in Yorkton, our Walmart. While this building has always housed that low priced store that everyone loves, the way it looks has changed several times. Now, when we pull that lever and once again send ourselves back to 2005, we can see what one of those changes did to the store. As the time machine settles, we see the store with its classic design, with one entrance, a giant blue gable above the door, and a red stripe wrapping itself around the entire building. If one looks closely, we'll see that the store is actually kind of smaller now, having been renovated into a Walmart supercenter between 2006 and 2007, which expanded it to include grocery store and a second entrance. Keeping up with that close look, though, we can also see a massive set of trampolines hanging on the outside wall, which has been done to show them off but save space inside. Looking even closer, we can see the fact that the brand name Walmart here is spelled with a dash between the L and the M, which was changed with the rebranding as a supercenter. Let's get back to our present spot and head to our next stop. Right, so obviously we are now in front of the Sport Check, part of a strip mall that seems to be as unassuming as you can get. You also have the atmosphere beside it, and a vacant space beside that was once a parts source automotive store. Why would we come here though? It's just a strip mall, right? Well, not exactly. For when we activate our time machine again to 2005, we see that this mall was once all one store, the previous home of the Yorkton Canadian Tire. As the time machine settles, we notice the older cars surrounding us, and plain gray outside the store, the design for Canadian stores nationwide at the time. The three spaces that occupied the mall in the present are actually still part of Canadian Tire's banners, meaning that Canadian Tire, in a way, still lives here. Isn't that neat? Before we return to the modern day, though, we have another stop to make. As we turn to our right, we come across a bright green and yellow store. You're probably thinking, wait, that's just Superstore, isn't it? And you'd be right. Before a massive change in 2006, all superstores are painted in this scheme, making them distinctive against Zellers and Walmart. This store is now the main supermarket in Yorkton, with hundreds of customers coming in every week. Even back in this time, it was obviously quite popular, with all of the cars in the lot showing that off. Now, let's return to the present. See how the colors have now changed to a white and blue scheme? Stores often evolve to adapt to changing styles of the world. Today, even though Yorkton Superstore is one of the most up-to-date stores in Canada, we can still see that the exterior features have not changed much. And if you go to the store today and look really closely on the outer walls, you can still see some of the classic green poking out along the blue. Alright, our next stop is right behind Superstore and is easily spotted with its bright red awning that bears the name The Brick. The Brick, a company started in Edmonton, is one of Canada's most dominant furniture store chains. with its many famous monthly sales and more than 130 locations across the country. Now, you'll notice that the awning shares its colors with a red stripe that wraps around the building. But look close at the wall facing the street. Along the red stripe on this wall is a patch of blue and yellow. Focus on that patch as the time machine gets activated again and we swing back to 2005. Notice how the stripe is now completely blue and yellow, sharing its colors with the rest of the store? In 2005, this was the home of United Furniture Warehouse, a popular and well known furniture chain. Years back, United Furniture Warehouse was one of the Brick's biggest competitors, until it was actually bought up by the Brick in 2004. During the next few years, United Furniture Warehouse locations kept their names, but began following the Brick's rules. In 2007, the Brick changed the Yorkton store to the Brick Outlet to unite the brand with its own chain, changing the store forever. Think of the irony involved with this story. Two companies that once fought against each other have now, well, united together as we venture back to the present. Now that we are back in the present, we can make our way to another strip mall in Yorkton. This one today holds the Canadian store Giant Tiger, the current home of the CTV Yorkton TV station, and a diverse trio of restaurants. Just like our previous strip mall, it all seems like nothing worth of mention. But if we slide back in time, we will see how this lovely strip mall has evolved. Back in 2005, Giant Tiger was a store called the Red Apple Clearance Center, a store that sells products at a lower price. Beside it, where CTV now resides, is a Warehouse One store, which specializes in selling jeans. Sharing a wall with Warehouse One was a Mr. Sub sandwich shop, with an all about florist shop right beside them. Ironically, at the end, so to speak, it is a truly lost brand, Blockbuster Video. This was a video rental store that was very, very popular through the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, and almost was ubiquitous with culture at the time. Sadly, it fell victim to the power of Netflix and other streaming services. Time to change back and return to our current time. Now, as we look at our next stop, it is obvious that what we are seeing is quite recent. The hotel we have to our right and the condominium building down the street were only built in 2013, making them some of Yorkton's newest additions. But as we look back in time into 2005, we see that this area is once just an empty field, leading directly to the Yorkton Viterra grain elevator. You might be wondering why this field remained empty for so long, and the answer is actually quite surprising. Where we are standing right now is actually the spot where the Canadian Northern Railway once ran through Yorkton. This rail company, now a part of Canadian National, ran a branch line from the eastern town of Roxton, about 30 kilometers east of Yorkton, through the city and onto Saskatoon in 1915. When Canadian National took over in 1923, they pulled the line up in favor of the Grand Trunk Pacific Line downtown, which is Canadian National's current line. Speaking of current, let's get back to the present. Our next stop is another place most of us have seen in our adventures across the city, but one most of us have given little thought to. This strip mall, containing Omagaki Cannabis Store, the Moose and Bannock Restaurant, and Zagami Mini Mart, is one of Yorkton's newest businesses, with half of its spots still being adapted to new tenants. One thing that seems to stick out, though, why is a strip mall in the middle of downtown like this? Well, if we turn back time to 2005, we can see that it wasn't always a strip mall. This building housed one business, Yorkton's famous Painted Hen Casino. This has been owned by the Zagami Anishinaabe, formerly known as the Sakame Indigenous Peoples, since 1996. Before 96, the building was home to Yorkton's Legacy Co-op Marketplace grocery store, who built the large space in 1961. Between the co-op moving out and the casino moving in the 90s, the city of Yorkton actually considered making it a library, but determined the building was unsuitable. In 2009, the casino was moved to its current location on the west side of the town, leaving the building empty once again. In 2018, while the building was still owned by the Zagami Anishinaabe, the building was converted into a strip mall to house various local businesses for the indigenous peoples. But you're probably wondering, wait, what was here before the co-op? Surely a downtown location like this has a deeper history than just that. Well, if we get to the time machine to 1920, that question will be answered. Before we do so, though, we have to move a little south along 3rd Avenue. As the time machine settles into the era of black and white, we look up at an impressive old structure where used to be Yorkton's town hall. If you focus real hard, you could almost hear the bell tower chiming the time, which it did at 8 a.m., 12 p.m., 1 p.m., and 6 p.m., each signaling the official times of the workday. But black and white doesn't seem to give the feel, does it? Well, let's switch on the color lens of the time machine, and we'll be able to see this building in all its colored glory. Now, as we look at it, we can see why this town hall was kept around for so long. This solid structure was a government building, a fire hall, and a library until it finally began to fall apart in the 1960s and was torn down to make way for the building we see today. What a story for just one spot, huh? Speaking of storied places, let's return to the present and discover another interesting part of Yorkton downtown. Just down the street from the Moose and Bannock, on the corner of 3rd Avenue and Broadway, is the former home of Yorkton's provincial liquor store. This building, now home to the Pump House Athletic Club, is one of downtown Yorkton's newest additions, having opened in the mid 2000s. As we go back in time, we can now see what used to be there. As the time machine settles, we can see that the spot was once occupied by three different buildings. Those three buildings were each occupied by a different business, the only surviving building of the trio being the one on the far right, housing an advertisement service called D's Signs. D's Signs eventually moved to a new building later, and their old building was demolished too, making way for a renewed city center park. Before these, though, there was a short part of 3rd Avenue that was once owned almost solely by a man named Harry Bronfman, who was a big businessman in early Yorkton. We'll see more of his work in a minute. In the meantime, let's return to the modern day and move to our new spot. As you can see, we've just moved down Broadway to look at one of Yorkton's most beautiful and iconic buildings, the Cornerstone Credit Union building. Now, this place has not fundamentally changed too much in the past while, but as we turn on the time machine and look back, we can see that some things are indeed different. Here in the 2005, we can see that the building used to have a post clock in front, displaying one clock face and the credit union's former logo on the other three. Behind that clock, displayed prominently on the glass front of the building, is the logo Saskatchewan used during the celebration of the province's centennial. This showed that the credit unions like this one were proud members of Saskatchewan communities and supported several programs and groups in the communities that they served. Coming back to the present, we head north on 4th Avenue North to a seemingly unassuming building on the west side of the street. Brown and town bricks that make the building kind of blend in with its neighbors, despite the building having been made of newer materials, giving it a refurbished look. But that new look is spoiled by its empty signs, which seemingly show nothing has really resided in this building for some time. However, we can see cars in front, so something is here, right? But what is that, and what was in this building before? What needed so many signs in a satellite dish? Well, let's use the time machine again, and we'll discover that the building used to be a popular restaurant called the York House. The York House was one of Yorkton's pricier restaurants, being visited by more of the business people in Yorkton. However, this began to unwind for the business as other similar restaurants began popping up on the east end of the city. In the ensuing years, the building was changed from its original sea green colored stucco to its current brick, which was a clear update to try and keep the place current. Sadly, this does not stop the restaurant from closing in the 2010s. Now, let's head down south along 4th Avenue as we let the time machine take us back to the future. As we arrive at our next stop, we look at one of Yorkton's most frequented businesses, the current location of the Legacy Co-op Marketplace. As was mentioned before, this building was built in the 1990s as Legacy Co-op moved from its restricted downtown location to a place that was far more open. This spot was once occupied by several warehouses and sheds used by the railways. Those warehouses were turned into stores later on, but were removed as their restrictive spaces and aging infrastructure turned away occupants. As we take in the tall trees that frame the store, we punch in a past time into our time machine and head back into the past. Now as we look at the store from the same spot, we see that the trees have grown significantly since this old scene. However, looking at the store, we can see that styles and architecture have also changed over the years. The green metal that clads the upper parts of the store was once common for every store in the Federated Cooperatives Group, which is the association of business cooperatives across Western Canada. This style was changed in the 2010s to reflect the new looks and architecture for stores like this, changes that encompass our previous sites at Superstore and Walmart. As we reset the time machine to our present day, we move along Livingston Street to a seemingly random and innocuous parking lot. Though the weather has certainly taken a dreary turn, the history we are going to see is just as exciting as before. As we look north towards the back of the Cornerstone Credit Union, I have a feeling you're wondering why this place is so special. Well, we need to set the time machine again to way back in the 1920s and enjoy our longer trip back in time. Now, while the time machine cools down, let's look at the old building in front of us. Clearly, from the name on top, this building is the Balmoral Hotel. Owned by the aforementioned and legendary Harry Bronfman, it is the hub of Yorkton's Prohibition era dealings. Housing one of the only bars in the era and offering the best accommodations for railway passengers at the time, the Balmoral was a landmark in Yorkton. Now, it is in black and white, so let's activate the color lens again and see what the hotel looked like for real in the past. As we see this building in a new light, think about this. This building became famous for the various shady dealings that went on within it, and for the long period in which it was in operation. There have been many rumors that there were even tunnels beneath 3rd and 4th Avenues, as well as Broad Street, connecting the Balmoral with Bronfman's other businesses. These tunnels were supposedly used to hide the illegal liquor Bronfman sold in his bar. However, again, we are seeing a space that no longer has the building. And you're probably wondering why. This one has a tragic answer, though. On February 12, 1985, a fire started in a small kitchenette on the ground floor and wound up consuming the entire historic building, destroying one of Yorkton's most historic places to stay. The hotel is not lost forever, though, as a plaque still stands in front of where the leftmost ground floor window is in this time. This plaque describes the site's history and gives a glimpse into Bronfman's business. Even though it is gone, the Balmoral is not forgotten. But if you notice, our time machine is sitting on a patch of well-kept lawn. Where is that lawn from? Well, as we turn off the color lens and travel down Livingston Street, or North Front Street, as it is called in this time period, we see that we are sitting right close to Yorkton's Canadian Pacific Railway passenger station. This station was once one of the main gateways for the early town, as settlers arriving to stake their claim in Saskatchewan got off their trains right here. This station is also where residents caught trains to go to other places across Canada, giving the town of Yorkton a connection to the outside world. But this well-kept lawn is joined by what looks like a very beautiful garden. Let's hit that color lens again, and we can appreciate what this garden was like in its full strength. The garden was meticulously maintained by the founders of the Yorkton Horticultural Society, a group that remains to this day. This society felt that the station was the first place most travelers would see of Yorkton, so CPR worked with the society to make these gardens as lovely as possible to give a great impression for the city. Looking up at the station itself, we can see that it is a very distinctive dark shade of red. This color was used on every rural station on the CPR network, as the railway wished a consistent look for their lines. Eventually, grain elevators adopted similar colors, like the one standing behind the station here. However, like most things on this tour, the station did not last forever. As we power back to the present, we can see that today all that remains of the station are its foundations, half buried beneath the lawns that once made this location one of Yorkton's most beautiful areas. Railway passenger traffic had been declining even in the time period we just left, but had skyrocketed during the Second World War. When peace was restored, the downturn in traffic accelerated, meaning that small local stations like Yorkton's were no longer needed. By 1960, the station no longer even handled passengers, merely working freight and even providing just telegraph services. However, when these began falling too, the station was demolished, leaving behind this empty space along the tracks. If one looks close enough today, they can still see the parts of the foundations that the grass has not been able to cover. A ghostly reminder of where so many people once found a new life in Saskatchewan. Moving along in our journey, we turn our point of view to the east, keeping along the CP rail tracks. In the distance, we see a pile of railroad ties, a few warehouses, a cell tower, some tall trees, and the Yorkton flour mill peeking out from behind those trees. The Canadian Pacific Railway has played a crucial role in Yorkton's development. The current lines, first laid down by the Manitoba and Northwestern Railway, connected the Manitoba city of Portage la Prairie to Saskatoon, and were the first main way of getting in and out of Yorkton for the town's early years. Even today, after the railways have declined, they play a pivotal role in Yorkton's economy. CP's lines now connect with Yorkton's two massive canola pressing plants, carrying the seeds to and the fresh oil from the facilities. Where we are standing used to have a rail line, sitting right between the current one. This second line connected trains with the passenger station as well as the freight depot, which was beside the station. That freight depot basically was where people could deliver and drop off various stuff to be picked up and dropped off by the trains. Everything seems quiet now, but when we activate the time machine back to 2005, the ground suddenly begins to thunder beneath us. When the time machine settles, we see a perfect timing opportunity coming. A train led by CP Rail number 5662 heading north. As the train passes by us, we see how much things have changed along the rail line. As we gaze towards the flour mill, it's easy to see that the trees have been hiding a lot, including draped cabinets main building. However, the easiest difference we see is a grain elevator standing beside the flour mill. So, while we escape the vibration of the train, let's shove ahead to that grain elevator for a better sight of this former sentinel of the prairies. When we look up at this former building, we can only imagine how important this elevator was for early farmers in the area. Elevators were run by grain and milling companies to house the various grains farmers grew in their fields. Trains then came by to pick them up and ship them off to places where they were made into products, such as being ground into flour, like what was happening at the Yorkton mill, or rolled into flakes for breakfast cereals and baking ingredients. When farmers brought in cart and eventual truckloads of grain, they negotiated the value of their loads with the staff, earning money for their work. In Yorkton alone, think about this. There were once 6 different elevators lining just the CP tracks alone, representing the biggest companies of the time and line up along even more railways in the city, making up a 9 total across the city. However, even this shot shows a dilapidated version of this elevator. To figure out what the Yorkton Miller elevator looked like in its heyday, we activate the color lens once again, and it shows us a sight not seen in 80 years. The company's grain elevator freshly painted. This elevator was the third such structure to occupy this spot and was by long and far the largest. Like many later built elevators, it displays a white paint job instead of the dark red we saw earlier. Sadly, like many of its elevator brethren across the country, this elevator was simply torn down as wooden elevators got replaced by larger concrete terminals. Just think about that while we activate the time machine and see this same view in modern times. Today, while the flour mill does not seem too changed, it actually has been restored, and the display boards show the great history of the spot. But the sky just doesn't feel the same without that towering elevator dominating the area, does it? This site will soon change, though, as the flour mill builds a museum next to it to reinvigorate the past feeling of the site. That museum will be based off of the station we saw earlier. Keep that in mind as we move on and hope that the weather improves. Our next stop doesn't seem to be anything impressive, just a simple warehouse painted a dull gray. However, like some of our stops, the new coat of paint hides a fantastic commercial history. In this case, pay close attention to the receiving door. It looks different from the rest of the building, doesn't it? Well, as we set the dials to our time machine back to 2005 and activate it, we arrive in a sunnier past with a surprise in front of us. That surprise is that the dull gray warehouse we know in the present was once a sky blue color and owned by the famous Pepsi company. Believe it or not, but if any business in Yorkton wanted Pepsi products in their stores, the drinks had to go through this building first. Its relative closeness to where CP rail lines were also showed that this building was once a warehouse for a company that pulled their things off of the trains, stored them in the warehouse, and then sent them to local businesses. Yorkton made itself known in Saskatchewan as a shipping hub, and warehouses like this made that title possible. Roads in the city like Livingston Street, South Front Street, Dominion Avenue, and Victoria Avenue were once lined with warehouses just like this, along with stockyards for livestock, storage tanks for fuel and liquids, and grain elevators that unloaded and loaded trains and stored the products. As highway trucks became more popular in the 1970s, though, these systems became unneeded, and today this old Pepsi warehouse has become a rarity in the city. So, with that in mind, let's stay in the past and move up South Front Street. As we arrive at a massive building with red trim, we notice that this one has clearly not been used in a while, even in this day. But what was it? It clearly housed something big, and boy, did it ever! What we are looking right now is the former home of the Yorkton Arena. Under this dilapidated roof was once both a hockey rink and a curling rink, with the curling rink having 7 sheets and dominated by a popular lounge, seating 400 people to watch bonspiels, hockey games, and massive tournaments. As with every small community in Canada that has a curling rink, this building has become a massive hub for activity in Yorkton. From its opening in 1947 to its vacancy in 1977, this was once the place to go for Yorkton's bitter cold winters. However, as you probably guessed from the state of this building, this old rink was not long for the world. And though it worked as a carpenter's storage house for a long time, it was eventually demolished. Let's return to the present and see the site today. As the time machine settles, we see that the site only contains the building's concrete pad now. It is still possible to see the outline of the ground, but nothing remains above that. Just imagine though, on top of that concrete, hundreds and hundreds of people played curling, and many earlier Yorkton Terriers fought hard on the ice rink. In 1977, the curling rink was moved to be part of Yorkton's new Agriplex, which was later named the Gallagher Center. The Yorkton Terriers soon followed. As said earlier, the former building remained open for businesses to use, but few of them kept the building up, and eventually the place was demolished. Let's move on to our next spot and think about what could be next. As we arrive at a spot called Tupper Park, nothing looks too weird or out of place, not like a lot of our previous spots. However, the direction we are looking at is interesting. If we look closely, we can see a parking lot above the berm in front of us. But was that built for the park? No, actually. To find out what that lot was for, let's once again launch the time machine in reverse to 2005 and peer into the past. As the time machine settles, we see that a mighty brick building once stood here. That brick edifice was once part of Yorkton's Queen Victoria Hospital, later known as Yorkton's General Hospital. This is where people in Yorkton's past went for treatment for their ailments, gave birth, and also just had simple shots. Opened up in 1929 and run until 1962, when the hospital moved, this building saw its fair share of memorable events. After the hospital vacated the building, it was converted into a large 80-suite apartment complex, housing what would become known as Yorkton Manor Apartments. Sadly, though, just like the Balmoral, this building was not immune to flame. On the night of December 2nd, 2014, a storage area for the complex erupted in flames, and soon the entire building was consumed. Today, nothing remains of the original building, not even the foundations, and the only sign that we have that there was anything here besides the parking lot is a forlorn sign from the apartment landlords, naming the location as Yorkton Manor. As we mourn the loss of another fire victim, let's return to the present for our final stop. Now that we're back downtown, we can see our final stop is a locally owned Filipino store. This store today shows how diverse Yorkton is, with its widespread cultures and countries of origin for its population, especially the Filipino population, which has dominated Yorkton as of late. While the city is very well known for its Ukrainian heritage, the Filipino community has rapidly become one of the most common populations in Yorkton due to their rapid work ethic. However, this spot has an additional history aspect to it. What do I mean by that, you ask? Well, for the last time, let's fire up the time machine and see what this place was like 18 years ago. As the time machine settles, we immediately see a large white bus parked in the large lot beside us. That's right, this future Filipino store was Yorkton's Greyhound bus terminal, where people stopped on the classic North American bus system for their travels. Not only did Greyhound buses stop here, but Saskatchewan's provincial bus system, the Saskatchewan Transportation Company, or STC, had its buses stop here as well. Within this quaint little building, families arriving to Yorkton from across the province, the country, and even from around the world got their first taste of the city very much like the railway station of the past. Those arriving families, who may very well today shop at that Filipino store, or the many other ethnic stores in Yorkton, joined many other people who used those buses to travel in a cheaper way than airplanes and an easier way than driving themselves. When bus systems such as this began falling out of favor as flying became less expensive and driving became easier and more comfortable, the bus terminal closed, being sold to private owners in 2021. Today, those businesses steady due to Yorkton's massive Filipino population. There are times people ruminate about the bus terminal and what it used to be, and possibly if it could be revived. If it could be revived. Well, and that's it. Thank you for joining me and my time machine on this tour. If you want to learn more about these places and see more photos, look up the City of Yorkton on the Saskatchewan Archives website. For the first-hand takes on the history of Yorkton, look up Dick Durick's Yorkton Stories, where he interviews locals on their experiences in this beautiful city. That podcast can be found on Google and can be downloaded on many streaming services. You can also find it at yorktonstories.ca. In the meantime, enjoy your day and we'll see you in the city where good things happen.